and welcome to the York County Government Show. I'm Deb Gruber, Morrison County Administrator. Today our topic is Child Protection Services, and I'm joined today with Melanie Erickson and Brad Volder, Social Services Director. Welcome.
Thank you.
First, tell me a little bit about yourself and your role with Morrison County.
I'm Melanie Erickson. I'm the Social Services Supervisor for the Children's Services Unit, and I have been with Morrison County for around 20 years, doing child protection and then supervisor.
Great.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Brad Vold, and I'm the Director of Morrison County, and I've been there about 4 years. I have the responsibility over the whole agency, which includes child protection, safety net services, mandated services, those types of activities.
Great. Again, welcome. Thank you for taking some time to be with us today. What is child protection?
Well, child protection is one of our mandated services that we provide from the state of Minnesota. The state has the responsibility for child protection, but ultimately county government has the responsibility to carry out those child protection duties through our county board and our agency and with our social services department. So that is to assure like a safety net services for children, that they do not experience ongoing child abuse and neglect. So that one of the things with child protection is that in order to be reported, something has to have occurred, which sometimes is frustrating for folks, but then at that point it's our responsibility to ensure we do services and an assessment to prevent that from happening in the future.
Protecting those vulnerable children that can't necessarily protect themselves.
That's right, having a voice for what their needs are and what they need for protection.
Great, great. What are the most common forms of child maltreatment?
For Morrison County, most often it is neglect, and neglect can take the form of educational neglect, a lack of supervision, but also exposure to drugs and dangerous situations that involve drugs. For Morrison County, that namely is prescription drugs and heroin and methamphetamine. There are situations where chemical dependency can impact parenting as well with alcohol or some of those other things, but with heroin and prescription pills and methamphetamines are the most prevalent that cause those situations of neglect. Neglect can also occur in a domestic violence situation where there's violence with one partner to another that endangers the children. They might get involved in that situation and be also traumatized emotionally. There's also emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse. And physical abuse can range from shaking a baby and causing great damage, broken bones and bruises, but also to just, a parent becoming frustrated and slapping or jerking around on a child that causes an injury. For very young children, really there is a very low tolerance of any type of physical discipline with children that are 1 or under. It can be a report even if there is a slapping of a child that doesn't leave an injury.
Goodness, very sobering.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I might just add too that even with child protection, a lot of times we'll get calls that says, we're not allowed to discipline our kids, or we'd like to make clear that child protection is child protection. Parents are still allowed to discipline their children. They have a lot of choices around disciplining their kids, but just because you're disciplining your kids does not mean you're maltreating your kids. It does normally have to cause an injury or some adverse effect to that particular child.
And that determination is made by you and your staff?
Correct. There is a screening process that's made with our state screening guidelines that look at some of those criteria. And then also sometimes things are reported, and as we get through the assessment, we find that maybe doesn't meet maltreatment, but we still offer services. So.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, when you're out and about, or perhaps in your own family unit, or in your neighbor's family unit, or other, you witness different things. What should somebody do if they witness something where there's that question of, is this okay or is it not okay?
Well, it depends on the comfort level of the person witnessing, certainly. If they're able to intervene and step in, that is a wonderful thing to do. And I'll just give some concrete examples of that. If you're in the grocery store or in the parking lot and you see a parent and they're kind of tugging around the child and things are escalating, sometimes just approaching the situation and say, I see that you're struggling. Is there anything I can do to help just kind of de-escalate the situation, distract the parent, provide some empathy that can, prevent a situation from getting out of control. Sometimes it's a neighbor or a family member that you're aware of. You're maybe aware that there's drinking or alcohol involved, talking with that parent, expressing your concern, talking with the child. It's always a factor of resiliency when some other adult in the community can let a child know that they notice them and they care about them and that they are going to do what they can. So even if you can't stop a situation where you believe a child is residing in a home that's very abusive, if you can reach out to that child, let them know that you're aware and you care, that means something, and we should do that. Then, of course, also the other responses are to call law enforcement if there's some immediate safety need. We would prefer that they would do that above calling social services because the officers are there and available. And then also if there's not an immediate safety need but you're just generally concerned about a child that you're aware of or something that you saw, they can call social services and make a report and ask to do that. If you're making a report of somebody you don't know, try to get some identifying information as much as you can so we can figure out who that family is. Sometimes you might not have a lot of information as a reporter, but you don't know what other information we might have from other sources in the community. So yeah, we encourage people to report even if they're kind of questioning whether or not they should do that or become involved.
It doesn't hurt.
It does not hurt. It can only help, right?
And if individuals do report and they're concerned about maybe their neighbor and they don't want the neighbor to know, it is a confidential relationship between our agency and the reporter, and it takes a pretty significant event for that reporter's name to be released. And so they wouldn't have to worry about that.
And people can just also say they are anonymous and remain anonymous, and that doesn't prevent us from screening in the situation.
And that's good to know, because I think there is, or there would be, I've been in that situation too, where you've seen something that's a good reminder to say it's always okay to intervene as long as you feel safe and you can respond appropriately. But that's a good point, because those kids don't choose those situations, I'd imagine, very much. So it's one of those that if they have support, I think that would be good to know.
And all of us, our parents, have probably had a situation in a grocery store or out in the public where your child is not being managed very well. It is very frustrating as a parent for that to happen. And it doesn't take long for somebody to lose their cool. And an intervention such as that, just asking if you want to help or you need help, can de-escalate the situation.
Absolutely, because I would say more often than not, it's not something that has an ongoing issue. It's just right there, right then, there's a problem.
Situation, right.
Good to know. So someone has that courage, someone does make a report. What happens then with your agency?
Well, our agency takes all maltreatment reports that are made as such and treats them that way. And so we enter them into our social service information system. We have an intake social worker dedicated to taking reports in the agency, but also if that person is not available for one reason or another, we do have other staff that will fill in. So if a person does have to leave a message, they should get a call back within shortly. If they don't, they should call back. They are treated with great priority. And within 24 hours, then we pull our screening team together, which includes the 2 assessment workers, the intake worker and myself, and another child protection worker, and we screen all reports within 24 hours. And then when I say we screen them, what that means is we look at the report and see how that stands up against the state child protection guidelines. Because
so you heard this, and here's what we have to look for in order to advance it. Right,
to decide whether or not we can take the step of intervening in a family without them asking us to be there, whether or not government can step in, is if they meet any of the criteria in the screening guidelines.
Okay.
And we can look at past information in order to make that determination. So if something's kind of on the fence and it's not real clear, but you look and you see you've got 4 reports that will push it forward enough for us to say, yes, we probably should take a look at the situation and screen it in.
Just another good reminder why it's important to report, because it may not be the first one, it may not seem significant, but putting it together with other information we may have received prior could put that over the edge to allow us to maybe intervene and provide some safety, protection, and services to that family.
Sure, that makes sense.
And then once we screen it in, then depending on how imminent the situation is, if it's a pretty imminent high-risk situation, which would be a shaken baby, very significant physical abuse or sexual abuse, those are a couple of examples of something that we would go and see that child within 24 hours. And if it does not meet that criteria, we will try to see them certainly as soon as possible within 120 hours. But usually those even we're able to meet within a day or two, because we usually like to get out and address the situation. And if things are coming up to a weekend, we try to be cognizant of, is there a weekend coming? Will there be a long time? And so that's the benefit of having the group of us sit down and do that processing together. And sometimes we team things up, and this person will do that, and take on those different roles so that we can meet the needs of seeing those kids on a timely basis.
Very good to know. How many staff do you have working on this?
Within child protection, there's 2 assessment workers, 1 intake worker, and 4 case managers.
We really do have a team, is what my point is, to address these and combat some of these things. So you do an investigation, you do a family assessment. What's the difference with those, and how do you process them?
An investigation is reserved for those, must occur in those very dangerous imminent situations, such as sexual abuse or shaken baby or some very serious physical abuse, because we really need to come to a determination about whether or not that occurred in order to appropriately plan for safety. But also it's more than likely going to result in a charge with law enforcement too, so we go out together. And we also do inform law enforcement of all of our screen-ins and screen-outs, so we are working together with them on these situations. And so when we do an investigation, it is more of a process of doing individual interviews and taping those interviews and really getting at more of a fact-based situation about what happened first. And then from there, doing a risk assessment about what the risk is in the future, and then safety planning and service planning from there. If we do a family assessment from that point, we're not really trying to decide whether or not fact A or B really happened, but there's been a report and something in that, and the contents of the report tell us that your family is struggling with an issue. And we want, even if we can't agree that that issue happened, we're not going to spend a lot of time arguing about whether or not you left your kid unsupervised for a couple hours or not. We're going to spend our time focusing on, do you know what the appropriate supervision guidelines are? And if you're struggling, such as, you're working some odd hours and your child comes home and you're not sure what to do and the person you had lined up isn't there, then we get into more of a problem-solving mode, which is, what can we do to help you to make sure this doesn't happen again, as one example. Or in physical abuse, if we can't agree that you actually caused an injury, let's talk about, there was a situation where things were out of control in your family and you and your child weren't getting along well, and things escalated. What can we do to help you so that you don't have those situations again?
And really be a resource and a problem solver, like
problem
you said.
solving, and connecting them with services and community support so that things do not repeat themselves and can be in a better situation in the future.
Well, for everyone, for parents, for children, for all families.
Yeah, because oftentimes parents don't want to be in those situations as well. So.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely good. Maltreatment, when you do find there is that abuse, is foster care the immediate answer? How does that play out? I suppose it depends upon the situation.
Right. Foster care would be reserved for those situations that are imminent danger, and situations where we could not come up with a plan with the family to assure the child was safe, so that there would be a high risk, high safety need for the child, and we couldn't come up with another family plan like going to grandma's or having the perpetrator leave the home or some other assurances. And then if it's an immediate need like that, law enforcement then helps us with that decision, and if it's a planful event, then the court is involved in that decision. So we have another partner with us in making those decisions, but we really reserve foster care for the last resort. We try to plan with families another way so that doesn't occur, because that's a very traumatic event for kids and can take them out of their home and away from other good things within their family. And so only for those situations where we can't come to another resolution do we do that. But that does happen on occasion. It just is reserved for a smaller percentage of the families we actually work with in child protection.
A lot of times you hear if the county gets involved, they're taking kids away. And just to emphasize what Melanie said, is that's the smallest percentage of what we do. Our goal is to work with the family, with the child in the family, whether it be with mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, whatever that case may be. Our goal is to keep that child in the home.
And ultimately, I think long term, that's certainly what everybody wants. It's the best for the child, the best for the parents, the best for the community as a whole. Good. How have caseloads been? Has the rate of those reports or the maltreatment cases and things like that increased over the years?
Yeah, it used to be, I would say about 5 years ago, our standard was that we completed about 80 assessments a year, and now we're running about 130 assessments a year.
Wow.
So we are seeing an increase, and it is, I would say, as I look at the numbers, it's mainly has to do with that influence of drugs in our community, increased use of heroin and methamphetamines and prescription pills, which has caused an increase in neglectful situations of a variety of nature. So that's really where we see that increase, as well as some changes, as we'll get into with the governor's task force too, and looking at history and screening and a few more things as well.
It is amazing. I think we can all understand, or at least I hope we can, the impacts of drugs and how it can, if you use them, like I talked to my kids about, the result for you personally, but it's amazing, and it's not always at the forefront about how it can impact so much more. It can impact your children, can impact your family, can impact your neighborhoods and our government agencies and all of that. So it's such an important issue, and it's something that everybody needs to remember, that those choices are made to keep us healthy, but also our families and our communities too. It's amazing. You talked briefly about, and let's talk a little bit about the recent governor's task force that was put together on child protection. I know our local representative, Ron Krisha, sits on that, and there are some changes that came about last legislative session. If you could touch a little bit on that, I'd appreciate it.
I certainly can. So last fall, almost a year ago now, there was a pretty significant set of articles within the Star Tribune that brought about some very challenging cases in child protection, some very tragic events that happened with children. And as a result of that, I think it shined a light upon the child protection system, and the governor called a task force. And the governor's task force included Department of Human Services, counties, stakeholder groups, law enforcement, county attorneys. The group was facilitated by the Commissioner of Human Services and the President of AMC, Tony Carter. So they, through about 6 months, examined in a variety of aspects the child protection system: family assessment, investigation, intake, screening, case management, services, training, workforce. So they looked at a variety of the child protection system. They looked at a broad spectrum of the child protection system. And through that came up with 93 recommendations. And given the amount of recommendations, the legislature could not come to a consensus on how to kind of roll those out or what to decide. So they really only put out 4 legislative changes. And that was a change in the screening, that they're required to use the screening guidelines, that if you change it, it has to be approved. We have to make sure we cross-report with law enforcement. It provides an opportunity for us to gather more collateral information prior to the governor's task force in this legislative session. We can only speak to the reporter, and going beyond that would require us to screen it in. So now it provides opportunities for our intake worker to follow up with maybe the school or a grandparent or some very limited people. It's a limited scope. We're not going to start the investigation, but it does provide that opportunity. So
it really expands upon what it is we need to do to meet those mandated requirements.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, again, it really shined a light on kind of what we're doing. And I think what we did try to express throughout the governor's task force, it was, as I said, the county and the state really co-chairing that. Minnesota does have a very good system, child protection system. Losing any child as a result of maltreatment is tragic, and we should evaluate what we did and how we did it, and could we have done it better. But as we evaluated other states, examining their practice and looking at our practice, we felt like we did do a very nice job. There certainly is room for improvement, there's no doubt about that.
There is, because I think just one bad case is obviously one too many. And so it's good that it's being looked at, and it's nice to see the cooperative effort in how it was looked at. being we are, as counties, responsible for much of that system, it's good to know at least we have a voice at the table on how that should work then.
Yeah.
And with that, I know we had to hire some staff to meet those requirements. There was some funding that did come with that anyway, which is a good thing. So,
as Melanie had indicated, our intakes have not really skyrocketed as a result of the publicity around the child protection system. However, it has changed our screening practices. Those that could have been screened in or screened out, I think we're taking more of a look at should they be screened in versus may have been screened out before. So it is increasing the workload, and the legislature was cognizant of that as they rolled this out and knew about the publicity around the child protection issue. So they did award $141,000 to Morrison County to hire more staff, knowing that this was going to happen.
and one thing we did have talked about in our recent budget discussions for 2016 was that while it provided for funding for staff for your unit, Melanie, it didn't necessarily provide funding for the ripple effects of that, in which law enforcement is tasked with working with the staff in your area to investigate those, or with the county attorney's staff, who's then working with you and law enforcement to prosecute and address those issues if they do rise to that level. So yes, it was good because we did get some funding. Not always does that happen, but there are some other added costs with that, as there are often with mandates that come down that aren't necessarily funded. So,
and I also think the legislature and the task force was aware that this could happen, and hopefully through this next legislative session they will evaluate the other stakeholders within our system to realize that they have there's an impact there as well, and we'll think about that. And just to add a little bit, the governor's task force is no longer meeting in the form that it was. However, the legislative session did create a law that allowed the recreation of a new governor's task force, and our representative Ron Krisha is the co-chair of that current task force, and it's made up, I believe, of 4 representatives and 4 senators. And so they are going to continue to evaluate the 93 recommendations that came out of the prior task force. So these 4 legislative proposals or 4 legislative actions that happened this year is only the beginning of probably what will continue to progress as more rules and laws are created to ensure the safety of children and families.
That's an important piece too of what we do, and I know that you and other social services directors or folks in your role, Melanie, are working together as counties to ensure that we have as much influence as possible over those requirements or laws that come about, so it makes sense for those of us or those of you that are doing the work too. So
there's a number of work groups that are trying to take these recommendations and determine how they can be implemented in a way that is not too cost prohibitive or staff intensive. And one thing that I would say in terms of the child protection workers, it's a challenging role to be a child protection worker because you are statutorily required to protect kids, but also to play the role as the helper in the family, and sometimes those two don't necessarily jive. And so it's a very difficult position to be in when you're trying to ensure the safety of kids, protect families, but yet be a helper and create change within that family system to ensure that safety.
Yeah, I oftentimes will look to you folks and wonder how you do it every day, and so glad that you do, because some of the issues that you have to deal with, I don't know that most of us living our normal lives recognize and realize what goes on, even in our neighborhoods, even in our county that we live in, that there are kids out there that are being treated very well at all. Things that would make us all very sad. So those that have to deal with that on a regular basis are very gifted in terms of their willingness to provide that role, and it's much appreciated. What can a community do to help with this? What can those out there viewing this, what do they need to know to help with child abuse, to help with neglect?
I think that, as we discussed earlier, being willing to talk with a parent, to talk with a child are kind of essential things. Sometimes it takes more than once. Sometimes if you have a family member that's struggling and you make a run at it and it doesn't work out quite so well, it's having that courage to try again. And if a parent is not at a place where they can accept that, because of a mental illness or a chemical dependency. Making the report to the agency, of course, is important, but also being there for that child. There's been many studies talking about the resiliency of children and how important it is to have people in the community that show and demonstrate that they care for kids, that they generally like them, they smile at them, they greet them. Those are more powerful, I think, than folks realize. And so being there and being someone that the child can come to and report to, or can just have a space to be there and have a glass of milk and a cookie, is a really good thing to do. So not to lose heart on those small pieces of things that we do as neighbors and family members every day.
Every little bit helps, huh?
Yes.
Well, thank you both for the work you do. Very important work within the community, within the organization, and I appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us in with the York County Government Show, which is aired on Fridays at 2 p.m. and Saturdays at 7 p.m. on Charter Channel 180.